Hello, and thank you for joining our webinar today, the new Form I-9 and remote I-9 verification. Before we begin, I'd like to start by addressing a few housekeeping items. We will answer questions throughout the webinar, so please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box on your screen at any point. This webinar is being recorded, and you should expect to receive an email with a link to view the video recording within 3 business days following the webinar. And now to address some of the fine print, this presentation is intended for employers and their authorized representatives. This presentation provides basic guidance about the rules and responsibilities during the employment eligibility verification process. Please be aware that this presentation is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you require legal advice, you should consult with an attorney. And now that we have that wrapped up, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Dave Basham. Dave is a seasoned expert in Form I-9 and E-Verify compliance. Dave has served at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services for over 14 years, where he has educated audiences on Form I-9 and E-Verify with over 800 presentations nationwide. Notably, Dave has served as USCIS's primary liaison for immigration and customs enforcement and played a pivotal role in ICE's I-9 auditor training. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. Dave Basham. Dave, I will now hand over the webinar to you to get started.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rand. I appreciate everything and having me back on to do this session. So we'll go ahead and move forward on the PowerPoint if we can. So you see today's agenda. Hey, we're going to cover everything from this new version of the I-9, both not only the new version items, but the I-9 in its entirety. I'm going to give you do's and don'ts and tips in regards to using the I-9. And you see specific up again, but we'll look at that. As I mentioned, we'll look at completing the new I-9 in its entirety. We'll wind down the session with some storage and retention. Then we'll answer any questions you have that you send into the chat, and then I'll provide you those HR, CI, and those SHRM credits for those of you who are members. Go ahead, Rhonda. So let's start off talking about the COVID-19 temporary policy that ended on July 31st. First, I'd like to tell you, not only is USCIS, the verification division specifically, home to the I-9, they're the ones that develop the form. They are the ones that oversee E-Verify. They also have the SAVE program, but there's two other agencies that have their hands in the I-9 process. One of them is ICE. As you see here on the slide, U.S. Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. They're the enforcement arm on the I-9. And the other one is the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, specifically their IER section, Immigrant Employee Rights section. So in regards to this one temporary policy, let's talk about this, and I'll read this and then we'll go ahead and cover it. That, as you see here, this temporary policy ended on July 31st of this year. So back when COVID really took a hold of the businesses in regards to many employees were working from home. You still were hiring individuals. You still needed to complete the I-9, but if you were working from home and not seeing your new hires face to face, how were you able to complete the I-9 based on the policies and procedures of the I-9 at that time? And ICE realized that. So in March of 2020, ICE came out with a temporary policy that basically allowed employers to accept a copy of their list A, the employee's list A or B and C document to complete section 2, meaning the employee could have faxed or Skyped or emailed their document or documents that they wanted to provide the I-9 to the employer, and the employer could accept that copy. And that was a temporary policy, once again, that started in March 2020. ICE kept extending that policy throughout 2020 into 2021 into 2022. And now that policy ended, as you see here on the slide, on July 31st. ICE then, you see in the second paragraph, basically stated for those employers that used that temporary policy, you had an additional month, meaning till August 30th, to actually do an in-person physical document inspection of those documents, of those employees that you utilize this temporary policy under. You might say, well, Dave, I didn't know about that policy, or yeah, we heard about it, but I forgot about it. What should we do now? You still need to go ahead and do that in-person document inspection of those employees that you utilize this temporary policy on. And you would simply annotate the information on the I-9, and you'll see there on the bottom of paragraph where we have it underlined. When you get a copy of this PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on that, and it'll give you an example of where on the I-9 you make that annotation, which is in the additional information block, and it gives you examples of that. So just be aware that if you did use this temporary policy, that it has ended, that you still need to complete that in-person physical document inspection of those documents or document and annotate it such on the I-9. Now, for those of you that go, hey, Dave, we utilize this temporary policy. Now we brought the individual back in, but that document or documents that they showed us previously, maybe back in 20 or 21 under this temporary policy, now is expired. How do we handle that? Well, they could show you another document in place of that one document, and then you would still annotate that on the I-9 by stating you did an in-person physical inspection of the document or documents, okay? Go ahead, Brenda. So let's look at some of the requirements of this new I-9. Yes, as we're all aware, this new version was released back on August 1st. You can continue to use this version all the way up till until October 31st. But to be compliant in the I-9 world, you have to start using this new version starting November 1st. You're not required to have an I-9 on those employees that you hired on or before November 6, 1986. Lack of other terms, they were grandfathered in. And look at that last item. You can delegate the authority to complete the I-9 to an authorized representative. Let's say that Betty's up in Washington, D.C., and although I worked up there until I retired last year, I moved down here to South Carolina. Let's say Betty up in D.C. calls and offers me a job, and I accept the job. But Betty says, hey, Dave, we're not going to fly you up here to D.C. to fill out all your onboarding paperwork. We're going to mail you your packet down to you, and maybe within that packet is the I-9. Betty could have me go to whomever she would like to be her authorized representative to complete Section 2 on her firm's behalf. Betty could send me to an attorney, to a librarian, to a bank, to my next door neighbor. Heck, Betty could have my wife be the authorized representative to complete Section 2. Now, I know that seems a little far-fetched, but I would throw certainly caution to the wind if I was Betty of having my wife complete Section 2 without maybe Betty being on the phone and walking her through exactly how to do that. The point is, you can have anybody complete Section 2 on your behalf. But look at the last portion of that sentence as it's highlighted. Betty's firm, if they used someone down here in my area as the authorized representative, would retain liability for any errors that that individual that's completing Section 2 on our firm's behalf conducts, and that's whether they be written errors or verbal errors. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide if we can. So let's talk about this new I-9. Yes, the new I-9 had been reduced from 2 pages down to 1 page. You might say, Dave, well, what did USCIS get rid of on the I-9 to make it just 1 page? I won't say they really got rid of anything. What they did on the previous version at the bottom of page 1, there was the Preparer Translator Certification block. And USCIS moved that to its own separate page, and now they call that Supplement A, Preparer and/or Translator Certification section. Under the previous version's I-9, under the bottom of page 2, which was formerly known as section 3, is the re-verification section. USCIS moved that section to its own separate page, and now they call that Supplement B, re-verification and rehire. I applaud USCIS for doing that. Why? Because not every employer used the Preparer or Translator Certification section or the re-verification section. So they're still there. They're just not on the main page. So now you see the one-page I-9 is section 1 up top where the employee completes and section 2 on the bottom where the employer completes. If you do utilize the Preparer, Translator, or re-verification section, you have those supplement pages. A question I'm receiving is, hey, Dave, when we go to file the I-9, if we're only using just this one page, do we need to file that supplemental A or supplemental B page if we're not using them? No, you don't. But once you do use those supplements or those pages, you would attach that to the I-9 and keep that for filing purposes. The instruction pages went from 15 pages down to 8. Why such a reduction in almost 50% of the instruction pages? Well, I'll tell you, under the previous versions of the I-9, probably about 4 or 5 pages, there were pages of recommended abbreviations for various documents. USCIS removed those pages off the instructions. They still have them in the M274 handbook, Guidance to Employers. It's toward the back, but they removed those out of the instruction pages. They condensed some of the language to overhaul the language. I still encourage you to read the instructions, not only you, but anybody that has their hands in the I-9 process within your company. And I'm really directing that statement to those of you that have worked around the I-9 for years. You're seasoned. Why? Because I can tell you when a new version comes out, you'll be surprised when you start reading the instructions of what needs to be completed in each block. So we've talked about the I-9 going from 2 pages down 1, the instruction pages going from 15 down to 8, the M274 handbook, once again, Guidance to Employers on completing the I-9. It's totally been overhauled as well. It's about 140 plus minus pages. Then there's a list of acceptable documents, as you see here on the right-hand side. Now, I will tell you, when USCIS came out the beginning of August, and even maybe about a week prior when they kind of teased everybody saying, hey, the new version of the I-9's coming out, one of the statements they stated was that, hey, there were new documents added onto the list of acceptable documents. Now, although that statement is true, it's probably not what you and I would think of, oh, there was new documents added on. I will tell you, under list A, B, or C, there were no new documents added on, nor were there any taken away. But what USCIS really meant is if you look at the bottom of that list of acceptable documents on the screen before you, you'll see where they added that term acceptable documents, and they listed some information. We're going to talk about acceptable and some of those receipts in a second. So be aware in regards to those list of acceptable documents. How do you use this page? Just as a quick review during the I-9 process, once the employees completed the top portion here on the left-hand side, their portion of the I-9, section 1, then you show the employee this list of acceptable documents and you tell them this, that they need to provide you one document from list A or a B and C document combination. Now, I'm sure many of you might have had an employee tell you, or respond with, well, what would you like me to provide you? Or what does everybody else provide you? I wouldn't answer that question. Why? Because if you did, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division IER section can consider that document abuse, document discrimination. So if an employee does respond with that type of answer, you might want to respond with, I can't answer that, but you can provide anything you want off this list, as long as it's a document from list A or a combination of a B and C document. Now, I want to draw your attention, as you see highlighted, under list C number 7. Probably the last 3 or 4 years that I was with USCIS, and I continue to this day, I'm on a soapbox in regards to C7 documents. There's more than one C7 documents. There's a handful of them. You're going to see toward the end where we have a resource page that there's a hyperlinked information under acceptable documents. Your homework, if you will, that if I can give you, is Click on that acceptable documents toward the end here, once again on the resource page. When you do, it's going to take you to the I-9 Central website. It's USCIS's one-stop shop for everything on the I-9. And it's going to take you directly to the page of acceptable documents. It's going to list List A documents, List B, and List C documents. I want you to click on List C and go down to the number 7 documents. It's going to show you what those 5 documents are. Not only show you, but you could click on them and see a picture of them. I would highly recommend that for those of you that are not familiar with what a C7 document could be, once again, there's more than one, there's about 5 of them, that print those off. So in the event that you have a new hire, provide you a B and a C7 document, you know what it is. One of the worst things you could do is having an individual show you a B document and a C7 document. You're not familiar with it. You turn that individual away. So there's your list of acceptable documents. Next slide, please. Here are those C7 documents. I didn't want to advance the slide too soon. So once again, be aware, go on to I-9 Central, go under C7 documents. You can print off a copy of what those documents look like. Next slide, please. So let's look at each section. I will tell you there really wasn't many changes in section 1. Look at the right-hand side where we've got some comments over there. Just remember that the employee completes section 1 no later than the first day that they start working for pay. This is where I would have employers go, hold on, Dave, I thought we had 3 days to complete the I-9. We'll talk about section 2 in a second. But section 1, the employee section, must be completed no later than the first day they start working for pay. You can complete the I-9 before they start working for pay, but under what scenario? As long as you've offered them a job and they've accepted it. Now, USCIS, for this purposes of I-9 and the 3-day rule, etc., they don't care whether the offer and acceptance was verbal or in writing. But stating that you could complete the I-9 before they start working for pay, let me give you a scenario. Let's say on October 15th, and for this scenario, let's say I'm up in the DC area. Betty calls and offers me a job and I accept it on October 15th. She says, for payroll purposes, we're not going to have you start working for pay until 1 November. I go, great. We're here today on the 25th. I'm near Betty's office. I bounce into her office as a meet and greet. While I'm in there, Betty says, hey, Dave, how would you like to get a jump on some of your onboarding paperwork? Maybe complete the I-9. Can we complete the I-9 today? I don't start working for pay until November 1st. Yes, we can. Why? Because remember, back on the 15th, I was offered the job and accepted it. Now, hey, in reality, we understand that the majority of the time you're not going to meet your new hires until that first day they start working for pay. But this shows you how you can complete the I-9 before they start working for pay, once again, as long as they've been offered the job and accepted the job. So let's look at the first line. Not really many changes at all. Last name, first name, middle initial, others the last names used. Let's stop there for a second. Under the past couple versions of the I-9 in the instructions, it would state under last names used that although it's an optional field for the employee, that if they didn't enter any other last names used, that they must enter NA. Well, that requirement of putting NA in a block that is not used is no longer a requirement anywhere on the I-9 under this new version. Look at the second line. You see the address, street number, and name. Now there's several address blocks on the I-9. There's an address block here in section 1, the top of page for the I-9. There's an address block on the bottom of the I-9 where the employer completes. There's an address block on the preparer translator certification portion under that supplemental A, if that is used. Of those address blocks, this address block you see here on the screen before you up in section 1 is the only address block where a PO box is also acceptable. So the street number name like 123 Main Street or their PO box. Additionally, only because I've been asked this question, I don't know how many times over the past several years, Dave, we've hired individuals that are homeless. And when they go to complete the address block here, they ask, what address do they put in there? USCIS would state, as long as they can describe where they're residing as of that day, that would be acceptable. Maybe they reside behind Earl's Hardware Store on Main Street. Maybe they're underneath the bridge at the intersection of I-95 and Roosevelt Avenue. If the residence changes the next day, you don't have them come back and change that address. Continuing on that second line, you see the apartment number, city or town, state, zip code, the third line, date of birth. Look at the format there. 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year. But USCIS also states that as long as the date that they put in there is easily recognizable, that would be acceptable. Now, I retired from the Army 15 years ago, and even to this date, for October 25th, if I'm writing down that date, I will write 25 OCT for October 23. If I was to enter a date in that type of format, although it's not the format that the form states, as long as it's easily recognizable, that's acceptable. Look at the Social Security number field. The Social Security number field, you see we have it highlighted there along with the email address. The Social Security number field is an optional field on the I-9. It's an optional field. Employees don't have to enter it. Now, this is where I'll have employers go, hold on, Dave. We have the employees always complete the Social Security number field on the I-9 because we need that for tax purposes. I understand you need the Social Security number maybe for another W form for tax purposes, but don't confuse the need for the Social Security number for other areas outside the I-9 with the rules and regulations of the I-9. Social Security number field, once again, is an optional field. Caveat. Look at the second statement on the right-hand side of the slide. If you're enrolled in E-Verify, then the Social Security number block must be filled out on the I-9. Why? Because that's one of the data fields that you're going to enter into Social Security, into E-Verify when you run that. The employee's email address. Once again, it's an optional field, as you see on the right-hand side of the screen. But if the employee does enter their email address and you're enrolled in E-Verify, then you must enter that that email address into E-Verify. You might say, Dave, I wasn't aware of that, or I forgot all about that. Dave, we have hired individuals, we're enrolled in E-Verify, they've put their email address in that block, but we didn't enter it into E-Verify. Dave, does that mean I need to go back and rerun that E-Verify case, entering their email address? No, you don't. Just make corrective action moving forward, that if somebody does enter their email address on the I-9, that when you run the E-Verify case, that you enter that email address in there. Many other questions is, Dave, why does USCIS even put that email address on there as an optional field? It was all about transparency for the employee in regards to E-Verify. So let's say Betty, she hired me. I go to complete the I-9. She's enrolled in E-Verify. I put my email address on the I-9. When she runs my case in E-Verify, should there be some mismatch with the information I provided the I-9 versus what's in the government records, not only is Betty's E-Verify account will be notified, but my email address, I would be notified as well. Once again, all about transparency for the employee. You'll see then below there is the Ask Station area. Really no changes there except for a minor change. The employee still attesting to being one of the 4 citizenship or immigration statuses, but look at number 4. You see where it says a non-citizen authorized to work? Formerly, USCIS used the word alien and alien authorized to work. USCIS has gotten rid of the word alien on the I-9 and now states a non-citizen authorized to work. If the employee does attest to being number 4, then you see they need to provide one of those 3 items below. Then the employee signs and they date. That's it for section 1. Now, what is your job as the employer to the employee completing section 1 here? It's simply this. It's your job as the employer to ensure that the employee completely and correctly fills it out. That's it. Let's go to the next slide. This is section 2, which is the bottom of page 1. This is your baby as the employer to complete. The employee never writes anything in section 2. As you see on the right-hand side, you, the employer, Complete section 2 no later than 3 business days after the employee starts working for pay. We still get a lot of questions on the 3-day rule. Let's talk about that. Let's say in this instance, Betty's company is open Monday through Friday and closed on Saturday and Sunday. If I started working for pay on Monday, what day of that week does the I-9 need to be completed to be compliant? 3 business days after Monday, that would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. By the close of business Thursday, the I-9 would need to be completed to be compliant. I gave you the example that Betty's company is closed on Saturday and Sunday. Why? Let's say that I started work for pay on Thursday. Under that scenario, when would the I-9 need to be complete to be compliant? That would be Friday, Monday, Tuesday. It's your business days. If within those 3 days after I start working for pay is a federal holiday, a state holiday, or your company is just flat out closed, you wouldn't count that as one of those 3 days. For those of you that go, Dave, hold on, what about our administrative offices? We're open Monday through Friday, but we're not in here on Saturday and Sunday, but we have individuals in here working in the warehouses and out in the field. If we're not in here on Saturday and Sunday, and that 3 days falls on one of those days, how do we complete the I-9? You could simply do a memorandum for record, simply on your company letterhead, dated today. Maybe the subject title is a 3-day rule in regards to the I-9, and maybe in the main body you could state our administrative offices in this company, for purposes of completing the I-9, we're open Monday through Friday, minus whatever federal, state, or other holidays your company takes off. That way, if that ever comes into question during an audit, if you pull that memorandum out, end of story. And whether you realize it or not, by starting little memorandums such as that, you've started an I-9 compliance program. Let's look at under list A, B, and C, a couple additional tips here. So you see under list B that there's 3 blocks and there's only 1 block under B and C. Dave, why is there 3 blocks under list A? Well, there are individuals that come from outside the U.S. that come into the U.S. to maybe go to college, and those individuals could show 3 individual documents that, when utilized for the I-9, would qualify as a List A document. Some additional tips. Look under those documents. You see where it says document title, issuing authority, document number, expiration date? Common questions. Dave, the document title. Can we abbreviate that? Now, I told you under the previous versions of the I-9, there were about 4 or 5 pages where there were examples of abbreviations for documents. USCIS now, under this new version, have removed those off the instruction pages, but just as a reminder, they're still there, but they're in the M274 handbook all the way toward the back. Now, I will tell you, they're not much of an abbreviation. They've only taken off about 25% of the actual title of that particular document. But let me give you some generic guidance here per USCIS. And these are items that you won't see in their instructions or in 27 handbook or on their website. Now, I think for purposes of the administration offices, HR, or payroll within your company, if you use the abbreviation SSA or SSN, I think everybody would know what that means. Social Security Administration, Social Security number, right? But be very careful of using an abbreviation that's something that might be very common in your company or your industry or your state, but not everywhere else. Let me give you an example. I told you I live in South Carolina now. I formerly lived in Virginia, and both of those states where we would get our driver's license, it was called DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles. But it's not DMV in every state. Some states it's BMV, Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Some states it's the Office of Licensing and Issuing, et cetera, et cetera. So you see, be very careful of using abbreviations that are not common throughout everywhere. The issuing authority. What would you put there? Generally, you look on a document, it'll tell you who issued it. Now, the Social Security card, sometimes I get a question, hey, Dave, we always thought that the Social Security Administration issued Social Security cards. But some of them we see where on the Social Security card, it says issued by the Office of Health and Human Services. And that would be correct. So just enter who issued that document. Now, obviously, if somebody shows you a driver's license and it says it's issued by Walmart, well, Houston, we might have a problem, right? Document number, if any. Some documents they provide you might not have a number on it, like some of the older birth certificates. If it doesn't have a number, you can write no document number. The same with the expiration date. If there's no expiration date, then you can write no expiration date. You see the additional information block there? That block has been added, such as on the past previous versions of the I-9. Basically an area for you to annotate various items, such as what we talked about a while ago. Or if you have to annotate a form based on a temporary policy now that is expired. You'll see there's an area down there below. Look at the bottom of the additional information block. You see where it says, check here if you used an alternative procedure authorized by DHS to examine documents. We're going to talk about that in a second. Then below is that certification block. That's to be filled out and completed by the individual that saw my documents, that wrote the information from my document or documents there under list A, B, or C. They're the ones to fill it out. Section 2 is a one-stop shop, if you will. If at the time Betty hired me and we were completing the I-9, if I showed Betty my document or documents, she held those, she entered the information under list A, B, or C. She's the one to fill this out. I've had employers come and say, hey, Dave, using that scenario, Betty has seen your documents, wrote the information in, but then Betty takes the I-9 over to her supervisor and her supervisor signs. Nuh-uh. The one-stop shop. The person that sees the information, that writes the information down, is the one that is attesting. They're the one that examined the documents, filled it out, and completed it. Let's go to the next slide. This is that new item that USCIS added under this new version of the I-9 that came out August 1st. You see under the additional information it said, and I kind of mentioned it, check here if you use the alternative procedure. This is new. USCIS calls it their optional remote document examination. USCIS is trying to catch the acronym of RED. I like to use the term of the alternative procedure. Why? Because that's what's written there in the bottom of section 2. So what is this alternative procedure? So I told you a while ago where ICE had that temporary policy that began back in March 2020, but it ended here the end of July, where the employee could have, especially those remote hires, have sent you a copy of a document and you could accepted that for completing section 2. Well, once again, that ended on July 31st. But then pick up when the new form came out on August 1st and they started this alternative procedure. Let's read this information off to the right and then let me explain it to you. So in order for you, the employer, to use this new alternative procedure, you have to be enrolled in E-Verify. So if you're already enrolled, you've already checked that block. If once I explain this alternative procedure, you want to utilize it and you're not enrolled, then you must enroll in E-Verify. You must be in good standing with E-Verify. You might say, well, Dave, how do I know if I'm in good standing? Let me tell you, E-Verify has a monitoring compliance section. And if you're not in good standing with E-Verify, you will have been notified. Okay, you'll know. So you have to be in good standing with E-Verify. So the first item, in order to use this alternative procedure, you must be enrolled in E-Verify. Once you've jumped that hurdle, then to participate, as it says here on the right-hand side, let's go over these 3 items and then we'll discuss them more generically. First, you would have to review and retain copies of all documents provided by the employee during the remote examination, meaning the document or documents they provide you, a list A or B and C document. You would then conduct a live interaction video with that new hire, whether it be through Zoom, FaceTime, or whatever other platform that you use to conduct this live interaction video. And then you would simply fill out the information on the I-9 and check the block there in the additional information block to indicate that you use the alternative procedure in completing the I-9. So what all does that mean? Let's go back to that example of Betty up in DC and I'm down here in South Carolina. Betty calls and offers me a job and I accept the job. She says, hey, Dave, we're not going to fly you up here to DC to fill out your packet. I'm not going to have you go see an authorized representative in your area. Maybe she doesn't feel comfortable with that. She wants to use this alternative procedure. Betty is already enrolled in E-Verify, so she's checked that tab. She has provided me the list of acceptable documents. I look at that and I say, hey, I want to provide her my passport. So I then fax or email up a copy of my passport up to Betty. If there's information on the back of that document, when I send that to her, I need to send both the front and the back of that document. So Betty has that document in front of her. She then conducts that live interaction video with me. When she's doing that live interaction video, she's going to see my face. I'm going to hold up my passport. When I hold that on that video to her, it should match exactly the copy of the passport that I sent her that she has before, faxed up to her. If it is, then she completes that under Section A of the I-9 and she checks the block. That's the remote document examination. It is new. It does allow you to continue to accept copies of documents, especially those that you're hiring remotely. That includes, don't think that it's, oh, we can only use that for those individuals. Maybe we're hiring out of state. You might be a construction company in your city and you have new employees that you're hiring that are all around the county or their state there. And you want to avoid having them drive all the way in, might be an hour or two into your main office to fill out that I-9. You can do that remotely for them as long as you meet that criteria here on the slide. Let's go ahead and move forward. Examining documents. So in regards to examining documents, the policy is, as you see here on the slide, that you must accept a document presented by an employee if it reasonably appears to be two things. Does it look genuine and relate to the individual presenting it? That's it. There's the rule. If your rule goes up beyond that by saying A, B, C, X, Y, Z, you might be out of compliance there. Here's the policy. Does it look genuine and relate to the individual? Then you must accept it. The documents you see on the lower left-hand side, they must be original documents. Now you might say, now hold on, Dave. If we're using that alternative procedure and they're able to send us, a fax copy and whatnot, we're not seeing the original. When they say here on the slide that the documents be original, that's for those individuals that you're hiring that are coming in right into your office. You're seeing them face to face. Those documents that they show you must be original documents with one exception. They can show you a certified copy of a birth certificate. So remember, when you're completing the I-9 and you show them that list of acceptable documents, it says, as it states on the right-hand side, remember, you ask for one document from list A or a combination of a B and C document. Now, you'll see the note all the way at the bottom of the slide. Just be aware that at the end of January this year, USCIS began issuing redesigned permanent resident cards and those employment authorization cards. This is where you're going to want to go on to I-9 Central under the list of acceptable documents and click on that and click on List A documents and look at what that redesigned permanent resident card and EAD card look like. To be aware. So those of you that are used to seeing the permanent resident card and the EAD card look a certain way, if somebody shows you this new card, you don't think, whoa, that's a fraudulent card. That doesn't look right. Be aware of the changes, okay, of these new redesigned cards. Next slide, please. Avoiding discrimination. Remember, I told you that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, IER section that you see all the way at the bottom of the slide there, they're the agency that handles that discrimination issues in regards to the I-9 or E-Verify that an employer might conduct against an employee. Here are some of the examples in regards to some of that discrimination. As you see, limiting documents. You can't tell an employee which documents to provide, as it says, specifying documents, or even hinting to that. You need to show them the entire list and let them select either a list A document or a B and C document. As you see on the lower left-hand side, rejecting documents. As long as they reasonably appear to look genuine and relate to the individual, you must accept it. Now you'll see right there where it's highlighted at the bottom of the slide, where it says the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, Immigrant and Employee Rights section. You can click on that. If you feel that somebody is showing you a document and you don't know, wow, it certainly looks, suspicious, I want to turn them away, but I'm afraid if I do, that they're going to file a discrimination suit against me. You can pick up the phone when you hit that link. You should be able to provide and get the number, their toll-free number, to their assistance line. Where when you dial that number and they pick up the phone, they have their attorneys, investigators that rotate on that helpline number. They don't want to know your name of your company, NAICS code, city, state, industry, anything. They're there to assist you. So if you feel that somebody has shown you a document that might be questionable, or maybe some of your policies or procedures that we've talked about here today, or maybe heading in today's session, you wonder, hey, are we discriminating against our employees on how we're completing the I-9 with them and or E-Verify, or the guidance we're giving to them? That's where you can talk to DOJ anonymously, okay? Additionally, you see in their lower right-hand corner, denying employment based on an individual that's be run through E-Verify, and there's an interim E-Verify case status, okay? You can't do that. Let's continue on the slide deck. Receipt rules, let's talk about that. We talked about receipts there where USCIS added that under this version of the I-9 at the bottom of the list of acceptable document. So those of you that are not familiar with accepting a receipt, let's talk about that real quick. So what is a receipt? As you see here at the top of the slide, you can accept a receipt showing that your employee has applied to replace a document that was lost, stolen, or damaged. That means they already had the document. It was issued to them. But somewhere along the line, maybe they lost it. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say that I lost my Social Security card. Okay. Now I know with today's technology, you can go on to Social Security Administration site and you can, request a replacement of a Social Security card. I can't tell you per Social Security site if you request that replacement online, if it prints off a receipt. Okay, I'm sure it prints off, provides you something that you have applied to replace a document. But let's say that I did lose my Social Security card. I go down to the local SSA office here in my town. I bounce in there, fill out the form. I give it to the young lady. She then prints off a receipt and tells me, hey, Mr. Basham, we're not going to provide you your replacement Social Security card today. We're going to mail it to your home in the next 4 or 6 weeks. I could have bounced out of the SSA office that day with a receipt of my Social Security card. Went across the street. There was a restaurant that was hiring. They interviewed me and hired me right on the spot. They need me to start work right away that day. So me and the employer, she showed me the I-9. I completed section 1. She showed me the list of acceptable documents. I look at the list and I go, hey, I've got my list B driver's license on me and my list C receipt for my Social Security card. Yes, the employer can accept that receipt for purposes of completing the I-9. But that receipt is just temporary proof of the document. Let's look at these comments down below the slide. First of all, make sure the receipt was issued by the originating agency, okay? Once again, I gave that example a while ago. If somebody shows you a driver's license and says issued by Walmart, well, Houston, we might have a problem. But look there, it says within 90 days of the hire date. So that receipt is really only good for 90 days after the date they began working for pay. Within those 90 days, the employee must present the original replacement document or another acceptable document or documents within that 90-day period. What are they saying there? So let's say in that example that I provided that receipt for that Social Security card. So if I was that employer, around day 70, and this just is a recommendation, I would go to that employee and go, hey, Dave, at the time I hired you and we were completing the I-9, you showed me those documents. You showed me a List C document, a receipt for your Social Security card. Those receipts are only good for 90 days. We're on day 70. So within the next 20 days, I need you to show me that replacement Social Security card that you received from the Social Security Administration, or I could provide them a different List C document in place of that receipt for that Social Security card. To go one step further, I could show the employer at that time a List A document, which we know a List A document trumps a B and C document. So just know that that receipt is just temporary proof. You might say, well, Dave, wonder if the individual doesn't provide us a replacement document within those 90 days. What do we do then? Well, then you're outside of compliance. You're well within your rights to terminate the individual. Because if you allow them to continue on or give them more than 90 days, if you have an audit, it's certainly going to be a write-up or a finding. Look here where the third item where it says a receipt is not acceptable. So receipts aren't acceptable if the employment's going to last less than 3 business days. Let's say that your company is hiring an individual, having a big shipment coming into your company or having a big event, and you need to hire a bunch of extra people for a day or two. You still have to complete an I-9 on them. But in those scenarios, as it states, you can't accept a receipt in completing the I-9. And the last item there, you can't use a receipt to run a case in E-Verify. Meaning in that scenario I provided for that restaurant, I provided my driver's license and a receipt for a Social Security card. If that employer is enrolled in E-Verify, because I provided a receipt, she can't run my case in E-Verify yet. She has to wait until she gets that replacement document or another actual document in place of that receipt to run the case in E-Verify. You might say, well, Dave, in that scenario, maybe you don't get your replacement Social Security card for 4 weeks. At that time, when the employee comes in and then we annotate that on the I-9 and we run that case in E-Verify, E-Verify then is going to send up a flag going, whoa, you're more than 3 days from the time that Dave started working for pay that you ran the case in E-Verify. And it's going to give you options like A, B, C, or D, like one of them could be, your system was down or et cetera. And then there's going to be another option. It's going to state other. And in that instance, you could simply click other and simply type at the time we hired the individual complete the I-9, they showed us a receipt. Now that they've showed us the actual document, we're running the case in E-Verify. End of story. Okay, that's your receipts. Next slide, please. Copying documents. Oh, what a common question received. Dave, should we make copies of those documents that are shown to us for I-9? Or do we not have to? What's your recommendation? Well, I can't really give an answer because it's really based on your business. You might have a company that only hires 3 people a month versus a company that hires 50 to 100 people a month. My answer might be a little bit different. But if I'm really pushed for an answer, I always tell employers, if I were you, I would make copies of any of those documents that are shown to you for I-9. Why? Let's think of this as a flow chart, okay? So in regards to copying documents, you either make a copy of all documents are shown to you from all employees, as it says there in the first 2 comments, all documents, all employees. Remember, if any of the documents that they're showing you has any information on the back of that document, you need to make a copy both of the front or back. So if you make a copy of all documents as shown to you by all employees, you can forget everything I'm about to tell you in the next minute or so, okay? Because that ends the flow chart. You've made a copy of all documents of all employees. But let's say in this flow chart, you say, no, our base policy is we don't make any copies of any documents. Well, then let's look at the next item on the slide. But if you're enrolled in E-Verify, as it's outlined in the Memorandum of Understanding, the rules of the game using E-Verify, if you will, it states that if an employee shows you any one of those 4 documents there on the slide deck, you must make a copy of them: a U.S. passport, a U.S. passport card, a permanent resident card, or an EAD card. E-Verify calls that the Photoshop documents. Now let's introduce that new item that came out August 1st, okay? And that's the alternative procedure. And the alternative procedure states that any documents that are shown to you using the alternative procedure, you must make a copy of those. So you have to look at your business practice, go back up to that flow chart. You see now why I say just make a copy of all documents from all employers, which would be easier than my base policy is we don't make any copies of any documents. Oh, but if we're enrolled in E-Verify, we need to make a copy of these four. Oh, but if we're using the alternative procedure, any documents that are shown to us using that procedure, we must make a copy of those. Once again, weigh that up against your business practice. Let's look at the supplemental A and supplemental B. Remember, nothing's really new about those. They just moved them to their own separate page. Supplemental A is the preparer translator certification block. Supplemental B, and let me go back to supplemental A real quick. One of the things that USCIS now is highlighting, and it's something that I've talked about for years, if you use a preparer translator, when they fill out this, remember the address they put in there is their home address, not their business address, their home address. Let's look at supplemental B, the next slide. Nothing really changed in there. You still utilize this. As you see the comments off to the right, if an employee's temporary authorization status or temporary employment authorization document has expired. We're going to look at that in a second on the next new slide, which documents to re-verify and which you don't. As you'll see in the second comment there on the right-hand side of the slide, you may also complete section B, supplement B, if you rehire the employee within 3 years of the date you completed the I-9 or to update the employee's biographical information. Question I get is, hey, Dave, if individuals change their name, they get married or divorced or just otherwise change their name, do we have to fill out this re-verification, rehire section? You don't have to, you may. But like anything with the I-9, you need to be consistent. If you record a name change under supplement B for one individual changes their name, you better do it for everybody that changes their name. And the last item there, just because you re-verify an individual, if you've already run them to re-verify, because you re-verify them, you don't rerun another e-verify case, okay? Let's go to the next slide. This slide right here will show you documents that you do re-verify and you don't. I like to hone in on the ones that you don't re-verify first. Why? Because I found over my 14 years that so many employers got themselves in trouble by re-verifying a lot of these, what I call common documents or statuses. So first of all, on the left-hand slide, to be proper, these are the ones that you do re-verify. But once again, I want to stress, do not re-verify the following. Individuals that on the I-9 where they attested being a U.S. citizen or non-citizen national, doesn't matter what documents they provided that they expired, because they attested to being one of those citizenship statuses, you do not re-verify them. Number two, U.S. passports and passport cards. Once they expire, you don't call the individual back in and re-verify. The same thing with number three, List B documents. Remember, a driver's license is a List B document. That was probably one of the most common that when I've talked to employers, that employers were going, I didn't know that, Dave. You know how many times an individual's driver's license expired and we called them back in and did the re-verification section? You don't do that. And you'll see number four, those permanent residents who provided those documents. You do not re-verify those individuals. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Correcting the I-9 and misinforms. Let's go through these three slides real quickly. You'll see correcting the I-9. You can make a correction on an I-9, but if an item needs to be corrected, simply line through the item needs to be corrected. Make the correction off the side, initial and date. No whiteout, no strikeovers. If you use an electronic I-9, the electronic I-9 that you have should have the capability to show when you went into that I-9 what correction you made and when you went out, to show who made that correction. Missing forms. What do you do if you're missing an I-9 on someone you should have had an I-9 on? Excuse me. Let's say you're missing an I-9 on me and you should have had one. You hired me 4 or 5 years ago. You're doing an audit on your I-9s. You call me in and go, Dave, I can't find your I-9. So what do? Follow me on the screen. You provide me the current version of the I-9. I fill it out. I date it today. You show me the list of acceptable documents, I provide you a list A or B and C document. Now, because I'm an existing employee, the 3-day rule doesn't apply to me. But don't think you can get crazy and wait 4 or 5 months to get my documents, okay? ICE would probably have a problem with that. But let's say you show me that list of acceptable documents today. I had my document or documents on me. I provided those to you. You completed section 2. You dated it today because that's when you completed section 2 and you saw my documents. But in that higher date there in section 2, you're going to put that real date I started working for pay 4 years ago, okay? Now, if you're following me here, you might say, now hold on, Dave, in that scenario there, it's going to show you started working for pay 4 years ago, but you and the employer just filled out the I-9 today. If that employer has your I-9 audited, you're more than 3 days past the date you started working for pay, and the auditor is going to get written up for a late I-9. You're right, they are, but it's not going to be as painful as if you were to tell me when I fill section 1 out, backdate it 4 years ago when you started working for pay. And the employer did the same thing there in section 2. You backdate an I-9, you're going to get caught. These auditors with the I-9, whether they be from ICE or Department of Labor, they know all the tricks to the trade. And in this scenario, it would be an easy one for them to catch. Why? Because this version of the I-9 wasn't in existence 4 years ago. It just came out August 1st, right? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Storing your I-9s, store them anywhere that meets your needs, on-site, off-site. But if you get a notice of inspection, you have to be able to provide those I-9s within 3 days. If you're making copies of those documents, list A or B and C documents, USCIS, and I recommend along with them to keep those copies of those documents with the I-9. Why? If you're going through an audit, you've got those copies right there. That's a lot easier to do your audit. You don't have to. And make sure that you keep those I-9s only where authorized personnel have access to. Okay. As I always like to say, don't put them in a 3-inch binder and keep them in the lunchroom. Next slide, please. Form I-9 retention. Here's how long you retain an I-9 after the employee leaves your company. If they work less than 2 years, you retain it for 3 years after the date, the first date that they started working for pay. Or if they work for more than 2 years, retain the form for 1 year after the date employment ended, whichever those dates are latter. What do you do with that I-9 when that retention date comes and goes? USCI doesn't tell you, but I'll tell you. Why hold on to them? Get rid of them. Out of sight, out of mind. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, and with that, let me turn right on back over to Randall.
Thank you so much for all of that valuable information, Dave. As you all know, Form I-9 compliance can be quite complex and difficult to maintain, especially with ever-changing regulations. And this is where a web-based Form I-9 solution, also known as an electronic I-9, can help to simplify compliance and streamline the entire employment eligibility process for both on-site and remote employees. Now, some of you may already be leveraging the Griffin HR I-9 platform or another electronic I-9 solution. However, it's important to note that not all I-9 solutions are created equal. So we've highlighted some key benefits and features on this slide, but I just wanted to quickly touch base on one key differentiator, and that is the ability to customize and configure the Griffin HR I-9 platform to meet the specific needs of your business, no matter the size, scale, or structure. Now, I'd also like to present flexible authorized representative options provided by Griffin HR. As you heard Dave mention during the webinar today, anyone can complete Section 2 of Form I-9. However, at the end of the day, the employer will be held liable for any compliance errors. And this is where an electronic I-9 solution can be beneficial, as it can help to ensure that the Form I-9 is completed correctly, no matter who completes the form. So we presented a few key authorized representative options on this slide, in addition to a new feature that we will soon be launching, which includes the ability to schedule and conduct live video conferencing for Section 2 document inspections directly from within the I-9 platform and the I-9 workflow for those employers that are participating in E-Verify. We'll be sending more information to you in a follow-up email, so please stay tuned. I'll now be passing it back to Dave Basham to help answer some questions received during our webinar. So please take it away, Dave.
Yeah, it looks like I just have a question or two, and then we'll go into these other slides. So we're getting a lot
That's
of questions here.
fantastic.
Hey, are we going to get a copy of this presentation or recording? Yes, as Randa has stated, here within a couple of days, you'll be receiving a copy of this very presentation. Hey, Dave, is it best to check I-9 Central out in regards to some updates? Yes, go to your I-9 Central website, and on the left-hand side, the tabs, click on Related News. Okay, you can simply Google I-9 Central and take you right there. And by checking related news, that'll give you the update. So check that about once or twice a month. Okay, remember your homework. Look under those List C documents, the List C number 7, some of those changes, and that'll help you as well. And a lot of these others that are coming through right now, Randa, are basically, hey, are we getting a copy of the presentation and whatnot? Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And back to you, Randa.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you all for joining our webinar today. Please stay tuned to Griffin HR for more Form I-9 and E-Verify information. You can also visit the griffinhr.com website for more information about our Form I-9 and E-Verify platform or to schedule a live demo. You can reach us directly by sending an email to sales@griffinhr.com. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.